Hey everybody. I was seeing a lot of questions on some of the problems that were similar to these. I also looked over the quizzes, and these were kind of the commonly missed ones on quizzes. So I thought we would go over this quick. We didn't get a lot of time to talk about it in class before all this crazy weather. So I would appreciate if you stuck it out with me in this video. I'll make it as quick as possible. After you're done with this video, if you could, please do the Google form that I have attached here as well. It's only going to be like 3, maybe 4 questions, just to kind of see if you got what was talked about in this video, or if we need to talk about it a little bit more in class. And then once you're done there, homework 1.2 and 1.3 will be due when we get back to school finally on Friday, tomorrow. So please make sure that those are done when you come back in. Okay. So I made up this situation, which is pretty realistic for us right now. So we're talking about the temperature in degrees outside versus the number of hours past midnight. And some of the questions that I was getting from people on the problems that were similar to this on the homework was that they weren't seeing any sort of pattern. So let's check and look for a pattern. If we look at the hours past, so from 2 to 4, so 2 hours passed. Okay, so from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., 2 hours passed. From 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., 1 hour passed. And from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., 5 hours passed. Now up top, we're going to look at how the degrees changed in that time. So from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., we went down 6 degrees. From 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., we went down 3 degrees. And then finally, from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., we went down 15 degrees. Now, at first glance, I agree, it kind of doesn't look like there's a pattern there. But what I like to do is, since these jumped between numbers, let's fill in what it would have been at 3 a.m. So if in 2 hours it dropped 6 degrees, I hope you agree that each hour then it's dropping 3 degrees. So that would put negative 13 as the temperature for 3 a.m. 4 a.m. was negative 16, so it's still going down by 3 each time here. So down 3, and then down 3 again to negative 19. And then like at 6 a.m., we would have expected that it was negative 22 degrees because it would have gone down 3 degrees again. So there's your pattern, is that it's going down 3 degrees every hour. Okay. If we think about writing an equation for that, then I'm going to use T of X because that's what my table uses. So I'm going to say, okay, the temperature outside based on hours is basically what that T of X says is, well, we said it's going down 3 degrees every hour. So that's that negative 3x. Now, what we need to know, though, is the starting temperature. And it's tempting to put negative 10 because it was the first number we were given. But we're talking about hours past midnight. So actually, midnight, or 0 hours, would be our starting point. So let's work backwards and get that. So 1 hour ago, it would have been negative 7 degrees because it would have been 3 degrees warmer. And then an hour before that, it would have been negative 4 degrees, 3 degrees warmer than that. So still sticking with that change of 3. So then in our equation, it would be minus 4. So our equation for this would be T of X equals negative 3x minus 4. Okay, so we're going to keep going here. Let me clear off that slide. Okay. So we have that equation that we just wrote on the last slide. And then the next question that it asked you was to interpret the slope and y-intercept in context. So we talked about this a little bit before you guys had this break. But we talked about, so your slope I'm just going to label it with an S. Your slope is that number with X because it's changing every hour by that amount. The slope is what keeps happening. Your y-intercept is what you just started with. So I'll just put a y there. So you started at -4. So I'm not going to write this out because it's kind of hard for me to draw with that little marker thing. But what I would be looking for a y-intercept here is that at midnight or at 0 hours past midnight or at the beginning of this, something along those lines, it was -4 degrees. So at midnight, it was -4 degrees. And then your slope is telling you what happens from that starting point. So at midnight, it was -4 degrees. Every hour, it dropped by 3 degrees. So it's important to include temperature when you're interpreting in context, as well as hours, or whatever your two labels are. So notice I said at midnight, that's my hours, it was -4 degrees. There's my temperature. Every hour, there's my hours, it dropped 3 degrees. So I'm going to include both those each time. Okay. Now for the function notation in context here. So now we're talking about if I get that t of 1 equals 7. So if I end up with something like that. Well, 1, you can see, is taking the place of x. And x is hours past midnight. So this is 1 hour past midnight. I'm just going to write 1 hour. So 1 hour past midnight. And this t of x, or the outputs, are representing the temperature outside. So after 1 hour past midnight, it was -7 degrees is what that one's doing. And we were doing a good job on ones like that. So I could give you a high five on those, I would. The ones that look like these below this were the ones we struggled with a little bit. Now, what I want you to know is that this 5 and this 15 are still taking the place of x. So those are still going to be talking about hours. So 5 hours and 15 hours. Now, our hours are talking about the temperature at that hour. Trying to get all this written. So for this one, it's saying the temperature at 5 hours and the temperature at 15 hours ended up being the same. So maybe at some point it started warming up again. Fingers crossed. So at 5 hours and at 15 hours, the temperature outside was the same. That's how you would write that as a sentence in context. Then that last one, 12 and 10, are also in those hour spots. So the temperature at 12 hours, that symbol there means less than. So the temperature at 12 hours was less than the temperature at 10 hours. And then finally, you had some that had to do with domain. So that would be your inputs. So your inputs are these x values right here. So when we think about what it can be, we want to think about what makes sense in terms of what our inputs are. So our inputs are number of hours past midnight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check these off. Does it make sense to have 20 hours past midnight? Sure, that's possible. Does it make sense to have -2 hours past midnight? I would say no. It doesn't make sense to me to have -2 hours. For this one, does it make sense to have an hour and a half past midnight? Sure, that would put you at 1:30 a.m. And then finally, does it make sense to have 14 hours past midnight? Yes, it does. So the only one that does not fit the domain would be that -2, because it doesn't make sense to have -2 hours. So if I were to say if it says what is the domain of this function, I would say all positive numbers. And the reason I chose that for this one is because it makes sense to have decimals. It makes sense to have positive numbers. It makes sense. It only didn't make sense to have negative numbers. That's it for today. Go ahead and do the Google form. I hope I'll see you tomorrow. See ya.